Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the state of the world, or maybe just your own home, and wondered how the early Christians held it all together? Because let's face it, they were going through their own mess. In today's episode, we're stepping back into church history with author and theologian Michael Aquilina, not just to marvel at the saints of old, but to uncover how their ordinary struggles in chaotic times can offer us real hope and direction right now. From family chaos to cultural confusion, this conversation is full of surprising stories, practical wisdom, and a reminder that holiness is not about perfection. It's about staying faithful through the mess and showing up in the little ways for the people around us to remind them of the presence of Christ. So if you've been craving peace in the midst of all of the noise, or just need a little help trusting God's plan in the tension of today, stay with us to the end. I promise you will walk away with a sense of renewed hope. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Persistence in Prayer podcast hosted by Catholic mindset coach, wife, mother, educator, and speaker Kylie Hine. Kylie is passionate about helping you deepen your relationship with God through the power of prayer. This podcast is a space for high achievers who want to do it all, but also want to prioritize their spiritual life and grow in faith. Join us as we explore the beauty of persistence in prayer and the transformative impact it can have on our lives. Get ready to discover practical tips, insights, and inspiration to help you develop a daily prayer practice and cultivate a deeper sense of trust in God's plan for your life. Let's journey together towards a more fulfilled and faithful life as we invite the Holy Spirit in. Let's begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Persistence in Prayer. Today, we are diving into the history of the early church, but more importantly, understanding how the past helps us trust God with our present, especially when life can feel overwhelming or chaotic. I am joined by a very special guest, Michael Aquilina. Mike is the best-selling author of many books on a wide range of spiritual topics. He is the executive vice president of the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology and serves as contributing editor of Angelus News and general editor of the Reclaiming Catholic History series. He also has hosted the Way of the Fathers podcast and hosted 11 EWTN television series. Mike, I'm so thrilled to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Kylie. It's an honor.
I am currently reading your book, Rabbles, Riots, and Ruins, 12 Ancient Cities and How They Were Evangelized. And I definitely want to hear more about that. But I would love to start this conversation talking about hats, which may seem a little silly, but I recently read an article that you wrote on sharing faith in the little ways. And you talk about hats and how hats have been a symbol of your faith. Would you mind sharing that story?
Well, the premise of the article is that basic fact, my father used to tip his hat when we passed a church, right? Catholic church, he would tip his hat. And at some point, I must have asked him why he did that, because I know why he did that. It's because Jesus is really present in the tabernacle in that church. So at some point, I must have asked him. At some point, he must have told me. I have no memory of that. My father was a very quiet man, very almost silent man. He really didn't talk much, but that gesture is something that he did with consistency. And so it spoke to me then, and it remains with me today as an act of faith that he made. It wasn't a verbal act of faith, but it was a visible one, and it's remained with me. I talked about that, and I talked about my mother's also. I can remember when I was very small, my mother used to be she was devoted all her days to the Blessed Mother and especially to the Rosary. She loved to pray the Rosary, but she was a very busy mom, and I can't imagine that she ever had time to get like the entire Rosary in at a sitting. That just was not in the realm of possibility. What I do remember, one of my earliest memories is of my mother cleaning behind a radiator, one of those old-fashioned radiators, right? And cleaning behind it with some kind of brush, right? And she has a rosary in her left hand and the brush in the right hand. So she's working both hands, is what she's saying the rosary while she does her stuff in the house. And these things make impressions on you. These little things, these physical actions, and just the presence of the hat One of the things I said in the article was that that would be a hard thing to do since most men don't wear serious hats anymore. We might have a baseball cap, which I guess we can still tip when we walk by a church.
Yeah, I just loved it. Stood out to me that we can stay grounded in very simple ways. And if I remember correctly, you're the youngest of 7
I
children.
am. Mhm.
So family life had to be a little chaotic and crazy at times.
Oh, yeah. Both of my parents were 47 when I was born, and I was almost like a second family, really, because I'm the 7th child, and there's a 9-year gap between me and the 6th. So I was actually closer to my nieces and nephews as they were being born than I was to my actual siblings. So it was an intergenerational thing. It was chaotic. My mother still had kids in school and adult kids getting married, all of these things happening at once and trying to hold it all together. And we didn't have a lot of money. That was another factor. So it was chaotic and it was wonderful, and I can't imagine a better childhood.
Yes. And again, just for everyone listening, how beautiful it is that we don't have to overcomplicate sharing our faith. The things that kids pick up on and that stick with them are simple. And it may not be what happens at the mass or even in your prayer time with your kids. It's the simple acts that they see you doing throughout the day, the tipping of your hat, the having the rosary in your hand while you're cleaning. And what a beautiful testament of how your mom was able to fit in a prayer life while she was still living out her vocation as a mother.
Yeah, yeah, she did. She always did what she could. As I started to grow and become more independent, she would get to mass on certain days. I remember she used to go to a novena on Tuesday nights, and she would fit things in as time became available to her and everything. She had a good sense of what she could do and what she couldn't by then, by the time she got around to having me.
Yeah, which is such a huge thing. I think that seems simple, what we're able to do and what we're not able to do. But a
Mhm.
lot of women actually really struggle with this because we feel like we should be doing more.
Yeah. Well, you learn by testing the limit, and that's how you find what the limit is. And that's true whether you're a woman or a man. It usually manifests in different ways for women and men, but it's the same principle that's true. We test to see how far we can go. The thing is not to get discouraged, I think, because we need to be like little kids. Little kids don't fail and give up. They fail and, okay, they'll modify their approach to something more manageable, but they'll keep trying to find what is my limit? What can I do? And they'll move forward that way. I think that's a good thing we can learn from.
Amen. I think of the toddler who trips and falls 800
Right.
times trying to learn how to walk, but they always get up. I
Right.
remember thinking that with my own kids, their resilience just helped me to be more resilient as well.
Yeah, it's good. It's always good to have guidance in these things. So if you get a good spiritual director or even an experienced friend, the thing is not to measure yourself against other people. If you know somebody who somehow manages to get in all 20 decades of the rosary in a day, don't think that you're going to be Superman and do it too. It's what's possible for one person just isn't for another person, and that's not a bad thing on you. It's just one of those differences that God makes us with.
Absolutely. And speaking of differences, your book takes us into different cities.
Yes.
Jerusalem, Antioch, Rome, places where culture has deeply shaped how people lived and how they have practiced their faith. For Catholic women today who are living in a culture that pulls us in a lot of different directions, how does the culture around us impact our faith experience? And what can we learn from the early Christians about how to navigate those pressures?
It you can't even count the number of ways that the culture affects us, right? We're steeped in it. It's part of who we are. It made us who we are. And we can't really distance ourselves from it because it's part of us. It's in our heads. One thing that Christianity has been doing since the beginning is enculturation. It's finding legitimate, new cultural expressions for the everlasting faith, the faith that does not change, right? So we find new ways to express these things as Americans. It's funny what the pandemic brought about and lockdowns and that kind of thing, because it really did bring about new ways of sharing faith, new ways of expressing faith, all kinds of use of new media to help us to pray, really. It's funny. I've been following my wife as she adjusts to the Hallow app because there were certain things that she wanted on it, and she found that it's not really the kind of thing that you can dip your toe into.
Right.
It's the kind of thing that you really have to make a commitment to. So my wife is very funny. And so the whole thing becomes a running comedy routine with her, but she's learning to love it. And I'm always hearing these voices, familiar voices from Catholic conferences as she's roaming the halls in the place here because she'll have her phone with her while she's cleaning or whatever, and I'll hear a familiar voice. So yeah, there are all these different ways that faith and culture interact. In some ways are really good and they magnify what we can do, what we can say, the people we can reach, and so on with the faith. But they also can distract us. And they also can pull us in bad directions because the same technology can be used for very good things or very bad things. The same technology that's giving us the Hallow app is also giving us a porn epidemic, right?
Mm.
So we have to acknowledge that these things are here and we have to see how we can harness them for the good in our own lives. And I think that's happening. It's very new to us right now. So we can have kind of extreme reactions for or against it, but we're working it out. We're working it out as a church, we're working it out as a society. I think what my book shows is how differently the faith was enculturated in different places. Okay, so the faith encounters Greek culture and something happens. And it's a good thing. There are also a lot of distractions along the way, a lot of missteps, taking in too much Greek culture, maybe, right? And then you get these heresies like Gnosticism that kind of elevate the philosophy of Plato above the doctrine of Christ. But you also have these great things that happen, like the articulation of the theology of the incarnation, of the Trinity, because we have this new language, this new technology we can work with. And it happens in a different way in Armenia. It happens a different way in Eastern Syria. So I tried to walk through these different cities and look at them and find out how they came to Christ and what happened when that encounter took place. It's like mixing two chemicals together and you get this explosion, right? And it's fun to watch in retrospect.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating reading about the persecution from the outside of the church, but also from within the church, the different bishops. And you talk about some of them, they're really engaging preaching styles and how people were clapping and celebrating. But again, sometimes it led them astray into hearsay. And so, how today can we maybe learn how to better discern between what's engaging and pulls us in, and this feels exciting, and, "Oh, this is it, this is the thing," and what's actually truly faithful.
I think the only way to do it is to have a sustained and disciplined life of prayer. The prayer has to be primary, okay? Before any of the consumption of any of the media. It's wonderful that there are all these podcasts out there. It's great now that we have apps that give us such wonderful access to great minds. I'm a big fan of a lot of these people, and that's a wonderful thing. But our contact with Jesus Christ has to be first. Our relationship with the Blessed Mother has to come before our relationship with even someone as wonderful as Bishop Barron, okay? I think that we need to make that primary. We need to have our disciplines of prayer. We need to spend time every day, and it needs to be a sustained and generous amount of time. Now, I'm not talking about hours. I'm not even talking about 1 hour. If you can do 15 minutes, if you can do 20 minutes, that would be great, of conversational prayer with God. Even if you don't feel like God is interested in you or whatever, take it on faith. He says he is. He invites you to prayer. He invites you to that relationship. Go and tell him, and then sit and listen. And if you don't feel like he's saying anything, tell him something more. All right. When I first met my wife, she was the most wonderful thing that I could ever imagine. And of course, you want to make a good impression on dates, right? And so I would actually keep notes. I would make a list of things I could talk about so there wouldn't be these awkward silences on our dates because I wanted to be this sparkling personality she would admire and then marry, right? So I would have that list of things that I wanted to talk to her about so that I wouldn't forget these things. And it's okay to make a list like that of things I need to say to God when I get to my prayer time. All right. And you can tell him the moment you think about these things, but come back to them in prayer because they're things that you want to talk to him about, you want to pray about. They're the important things in your life. Lots of people do this with their spouse, okay? And it's a very practical thing. I need to talk to her when she gets home because we need to figure out what we're going to do with that dead tree in our front yard. This is something we're actually dealing with today. But you
Mhm.
could forget to talk about it day after day because you're just dealing with things. You're just dealing with things as they come up. So having a list like that can be a good helper. But what I want to say is just that the prayer has to be primary before the consumption of media. Media consumption leads to more media consumption. You can always just click again, or you can
Mhm.
endlessly surf from one thing to another, and it really is just feeding a strange hunger for entertainment, and we're dressing it up as a religious act. We need to identify those religious acts like the rosary and our mental prayer, our prayer of conversation with God, and be true to those first of all. That will give us the power of discernment. It'll give us the power of the Holy Spirit as we confront all the things in our culture that we might find iffy, questionable, and we feel the need for guidance as we approach.
I love everything that you said. The prayer is primary, and we have to have that foundation. And you talked about making a list. A few weeks ago, I went to an all school mass with my son's in kindergarten, and the homily was about what questions do you have for Jesus? And so the kids were raising their hands, all these things that they wanted to ask Jesus. And my 6-year-old keeps coming back to that, "Mom, what do you wanna ask Jesus?" He'll keep asking me, "What do you wanna ask Jesus?" And it has just really made me think, what questions do I have to take to prayer? And the depth of his own questions, he's been asking me, "Mom, I would just wanna ask Jesus, why are we here? If we're gonna go to heaven, why would he put us here anyway?" And it's really just making him think, and he's coming up with his own answers that are very accurate, in my
Mhm.
opinion. And
Yeah.
so it's been beautiful, but like you said, we forget what questions we have because we get caught up in our circumstances.
Yes.
So just having that question, having a set prayer time, and taking the initiative to start a conversation with the Lord and listen, I think is so beautiful. And you are a highly intellectual person, but you know that it begins with that personal conversation with the Lord. Let me pause here for just a minute. If you're listening and thinking, that's me, I'm consuming lots of content, even spiritual content, but I'm struggling to make peace for real, quiet connections with the Lord, I want to invite you to something deeper. I offer free confidence and clarity calls for Catholic women who are overwhelmed, stretched thin, feeling scattered, and just really need some quiet space. It's not coaching, it's just a space for you to breathe and to reflect and hear what God might be speaking into your season. So you can find a link for that in the show notes, and I would be honored to sit with you and reflect back where the Lord is working and what he might be calling you to. I read something recently on how to continue living out your consecration to Mary. You brought up Mary. And one of the keys in it was don't make your mental prayer time study time. So when we're having those conversations with God, don't make it about learning everything, but more about that staying in your heart
Yeah.
and receiving from the Lord.
That's excellent advice.
So I really love everything that you said. Thank you for that. When we are talking about the chaos of some of these cities and the unrest, which some of us can feel like we have this our own unrest even in our homes, what do you hope that readers take away from some of these stories?
I think you can get a lot of hope from history. When you look back and you see the kinds of things that people have dealt with, you come to the realization that there's never been a golden age. There's never been a time when, you know, wow, we have the perfect pastor, the perfect bishop, the perfect pope, and our country is at peace and all's right with the world. That's never been the case. No matter where you live, the church is always dealing with some pretty big things. And we personally are always dealing with pretty big things. So you come to the realization that no, it wasn't easier to be a Christian in the fourth century. As a matter of fact, it was a lot harder to be a Christian in the fourth century. You had to try to sort out among all of these competing messages you were getting from people who were very persuasive, right? And they were claiming different things about the nature and person of Jesus Christ, right? You know that one of these many options being presented to you is the truth. You know that all of the others then must be heresy because they're not agreeing with each other. And you look at it and you say, I don't have the intellectual equipment to deal with this. Even if I had gone to school, most people then didn't go to school, right? Most people then could not read. And yet they had to try to sort these things out for themselves and find out where the truth is. It was a real challenge in the 4th century. It was a real challenge in the 13th century. I remember seeing a book once with the title, The 13th, Greatest of Centuries, right? As if there was this golden age, the 13th century, and it was a golden age because there was Thomas Aquinas, right? And there was Bonaventure. There were all of these other greats there in the 13th century. But those greats arose in response to the challenges of their time. And these were great challenges. Okay, there were great heresies threatening the unity of the church in Europe at that time. There were all kinds of challenges in terms of foreign relations with what we now call the Middle East. There were many challenges in the 13th century. It's always tough. It's always tough. And yet, what we see is that in every century, there's a response from the saints. The saints are those who arise and respond to the challenges of their time and live the Christian life in spite of all the distractions, in spite of all the obstacles. They're the ones who show us how to make our way in our own time. So I think that's one of the great things about reading history, is that you see how other people did it. I like to focus on ordinary people as much as I can. The difficulty with that is the documentary record is often made up of intellectuals, right? And historians are mostly concerned about generals and kings and what happens on a field of battle. I like to find out as much as I can about what ordinary life was like at a particular time. What was it like to live in a home, in a neighborhood, in these cities that are now lost? And we can find that out in a lot of ways, accidental ways, through letters that people were writing to each other, through grocery lists, through prayers that people scribbled down and then they got lost, right? And they were found 1,000 years later. All of these different ways that we can cobble together a sense of what life was like in an ancient time, in a time that's otherwise remote from us, and it seems almost inaccessible.
Did you have any favorite stories that really inspired you as you were reading through these, whether from an ordinary, maybe a grocery list that really inspired you, or even from some of the stories of the saints?
There are lots of favorite stories, yes. Some of them were just so wild, and yet they're attested to by many different historians, by many different contemporaries. For example, the founding of the church in Armenia had a strange beginning. What happened? A Persian assassinated the king of Armenia, right? And somehow the assassin was caught. He and his family were all executed, and one of his sons managed to evade the capture and was raised in a remote place. At the same time, they spirited off the king's son, who was very young, and sent him to Rome for his education and his upbringing, and then brought him back to rule. Anyway, these two children end up there. One of them had become a Christian, and he ends up evangelizing first the king and then the entire country for Jesus Christ. And the story is even more involved and complicated than that. It would take us all our time together to tell the story. But these things happen that God works in such strange, unpredictable ways, so that when you think everything is so awful, he suddenly shows you the way to a better future. And it's always a surprise. So when we sit around and we read the news and we say, there's no way out of this mess, there's no way out of this mess. God already knows the way out of the mess. And he's just trying to see how his people will respond, how they'll correspond to the graces that he gives. But we're going to be the ones who have to be the saints to take it forward and to change things. We can't change the White House. We can't change the Vatican. We can't change much, but we can change things in our own hearts first and in our own homes second. That's manageable. What can I do? I can make my house a little bit cleaner. I know I can do that, right? By picking up after the things I drop immediately after I drop them. I know I can make my life a little bit easier that way, a little bit better, and it'll be better for my family. So there are things we can do. Anyway, those are my takeaways from some of the stories. I'm trying to think of other stories that I really enjoyed in this. I love a lot of the stories about Constantinople, for example, and Constantine's decision that he was going to make a new city, a new Rome, and this Rome was going to be entirely Christian. And so for him to plan out a city that way, he would make a new Christian city out of the pieces of pagan civilization. He would take apart buildings in other places and put them back together as Christian buildings in his new city. And the surprising ways that went forward as well. Even the best laid plans of us don't always work out the way we intend them to. So, yeah, there are just many great stories that I love in all of the cities that I feature in the book. The chapters are just made up of stories entirely.
Yeah, it was fun to read. It was a challenge for me with all of the names just because language is I think can be challenging when you're not
Right,
exposed to it a lot, and
right.
so all the different languages and the wordings of the different cultures. I love this again, this theme of talking about the ordinary and these people who become extraordinary, but behind those people, there are the everyday people, let's just call them
Yeah,
those. And this idea of even making our homes more clean, this act of self-discipline that actually helps to make us holier.
yeah.
Do you have anything else that comes to mind when we're talking about the ordinary life for those women who maybe feel like they're in the trenches right now? It's taking care of kids and it's repetitive and they feel like it's a struggle.
Yes, yes. And it is a struggle, and it's always been a struggle, and it always will be. Again, it's good to read the lives of the saints because and it's good to read the good lives of the saints and not the ones that emphasize the extraordinary, but those that emphasize the ordinary. One of the books that really affected me when I was younger was a book titled Church History in Light of the Saints, I believe was the title. And it was actually used as a high school history textbook many years ago, almost 100 years ago. And it really does tell the stories in ways that are real, that are realistic. And when you read the stories as the saints told them, like St. Augustine's account of his own life and his confessions, you're reading something that's real. You're reading about a mother who struggled for 17 years. And you know what? She blundered a lot of the way through it. She would go and get advice from different priests and bishops. She would try what they said. Some things worked, some things didn't. And then she would make a decision. She was going to throw her son and his concubine out of the house. And then she would go back on that. She'd say, no, come back in.
Mm.
And she had to change her mind a lot. She had to be willing to change and to try to figure out what God wanted. And he says in his book that she prayed with tears for 17 years for his conversion. And that's remarkable. He crossed the sea. He got a job in Rome. And he tricked her and told her the wrong time for his departure. He left earlier, and she was left weeping on the dock. That's what a creep her son was, right? And so she got on the next boat. She followed him. Now, sea travel at that time was rough, it was dangerous, it was unpleasant, and it was not for the faint of heart. And yet she took this upon herself, and she did it by herself. She persevered. She had a singular focus. She wasn't a perfect person. What she found out in the end, because what was frustrating for her? She wanted something good, and
Mhm.
she was so frustrated with God because it wasn't like she was asking for something for herself. She wanted her son to be a practicing Catholic. So she was frustrated that God is not giving her this good thing that she wants. She's praying for 17 years. In the end, she learns that what God wanted was for Augustine to be a saint, not only a
Mm.
practicing Catholic, but a saint. And he wanted Monica to be a saint. And this was the way that Monica, a very imperfect person, became a saint through that hardship that went on for many years. I don't know. I think that part of our problem today might be that we don't really live in generations anymore. Like I spent all of my adult life far away from my parents. So I didn't see my aunts, my uncles, I didn't see their struggles through life and that kind of thing. I saw what I saw when I was growing up, and then zoom, I was out on my own, right? And we lived far away from my wife's family as well. And I think that we lose a lot when that happens because we don't have the older generation there with us day to day telling us, this is what you're going through right now. Everybody goes through this. It's really hard. And you know what? It lasts a long time. Here's how we get through it, right? And this needs to happen, I think. We need to find ways for this to happen now because we're such a mobile society. And we do just get to adulthood and then immediately get far away from all of those who brought us to adulthood. I think that's a hard thing. And I don't think it's an entirely healthy thing.
Yeah, and I think our brains automatically just jump to this conclusion that we're the only person that's
Right.
experiencing this thing that we're going through. And Saint Monica is such a perfect example because I know women will often come to me and they're really struggling. They think they're struggling with something, but at the root of it is they feel like they're a bad Catholic or they're a bad person because their child is no longer practicing. I think we all have people in our families and in our lives who are no longer practicing Catholics, and it's
Mhm.
painful. It's painful to pray for them and see that they're not coming back to the church. But St. Augustine is such a beautiful example
Right.
that sometimes God often, almost always, God allows the struggle for a purpose.
Right.
It was the path for St. Monica to become a saint. It was the path for St. Augustine to become a saint, was to go through that struggle. And just like you mentioned, I think it's so important to go back to those stories, whether we hear them from our parents, from our grandparents, or from reading the lives of the saints.
Yeah. I'm really devoted to Saint Monica. I think that her life shows us a lot, teaches us a lot, and I'm so glad that we have so many records of it, and not only records, but places we can go. Whenever I take a group to Rome, I always visit all of the Monica sites there because her remains are in the city at Sant'Agostino. We can also visit, and we do visit, the place where her funeral likely took place, which is the Christian Basilica at Ostia Antica. It's still standing, just a ruin now, but it's standing. And you could also walk the streets that she walked there in Ostia when she was there with Augustine. And also in the cathedral at Ostia Antica, you can find her tombstone, which was discovered only in the 20th century. So yeah, these are all wonderful things, and she's just a wonderful saint.
Absolutely. One of the things that I know comes up in your book, and I don't feel like I give this enough credit sometimes, are the role of beauty and song and community. In fact, I think I can't remember what saint it was, but you had mentioned the way that he drew people in was he took theology and he put them into song. And so it was
Oh yeah.
very easy for people to remember and they were drawn to that.
You're talking about Saint Ephrem of Syria.
Yes.
And he was trying to fight heresy, and what happened at the time was that the heretics had the great songs. They really did. And sometimes Ephrem would even take the melodies of these secular songs or heretical songs, and he would set better words to them,
Mm,
right? And then he tried something really interesting. Women were not usually allowed to sing in church. It was only men who sang in church, right? But he put together a women's choir and he had them sing in the marketplace. So
mm,
you're there in the marketplace and there's all the clattering of wagons and wheels going on and all the selling and all the sounds of the animals that were in the marketplace to be sold. And through that din, you suddenly heard this beautiful music. That's how he decided he was going to spread the faith. That's one way he did. He also was one of the early builders of a hospital. He was a deacon in the church, and it fell upon him to take care of plague victims, and so he built a hospital. This is the way Ephraim went at the big cultural problems. Okay, if it's a plague, we do this. If it's heresy, we do that. And he was a very creative man.
yeah, I just think that's so cool. And it's such a reminder for us that the way of spreading faith is unique and we each get to utilize our own God given gifts. And we can take some of these ideas and apply them to ourselves. I know for me, as I've continued to grow in my faith life, when I hear, I'm out and about and you hear music played or you hear lyrics, and you're just much more aware when you're older of what those lyrics mean than when
Mhm.
you are younger and you just sing them in your head. And I am constantly taking the words of the Hail Mary and just putting them to the tune of whatever is on just to guard my mind from some of the lyrics that are not so great. I'd love to hear if you have some ideas on other ways that we as women can help spread the faith in our families, because I know that family is a huge foundation and something that you talk about a lot.
The thing that I've found most helpful is devotion to the guardian angels, especially the guardian angels of my wife and my children. When I was first approaching becoming a dad, I knew I was going to ace it because I had gone to a good university and got great grades, and my career was going very well. And I was really impressed with what I was accomplishing. And so I knew that I would just continue this kind of success with fatherhood. And then God sent us, this child who's been laboratory tested and proven to be the most willful creature on God's green earth. He has to challenge you all the time. He loves to argue. My oldest, my son, he loves to argue, and he pushed back on anything my wife would try to get him to do. He drove her crazy. She had no brothers, for one thing, so she really didn't know. She's still adjusting to this male, and now there's another male in the thing. And Michael's the kind of kid who, if you tell him to color within the lines, he will sit there very carefully coloring outside the lines so that not a single little stroke gets inside the lines. He's going to do the opposite of what you told him to do, right? So he was driving me crazy. And I started going to confession every week. And I would go in, and maybe you've done this too. I would go in and I would make my confession. And I would really make his confession because I'd say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 1 week since my last confession. And in that time, I lost my temper 3 times. And let me tell you why." And then I'd talk about all the things my kid did
Mm.
that week that just drove me crazy. And my confessor had a lot of patience with me. And he let me do this for a couple weeks. Then, like the third time, he stopped me in the middle of one of my rants about what my kid had done to me a few days before. And he said, Mike, next time you see your child, I want you to do something. Before you greet him, I want you to greet his guardian angel, because then it's 3 against 1. It's you and his guardian angel and your guardian angel against him, but you're not really against him. You're all pulling for him. You're trying to get him to heaven. And so I tried that. I tried that with my son, and it revolutionized our relationship. He's 35 now, right? So what? He was about 4 years old then, and he was a handful, and he still is a
Yeah.
handful. He still is the most willful person you'll ever meet. He still loves to argue, but we have a great relationship because I think his guardian angel brought me to appreciate all of these
Mm.
things as potentially good qualities. Yeah, he does resist authority, even his father's infallible authority. But you know what? That helped him to push back against the culture when he got older. It helped him to do the right things when he was an adult. So it did help me to cultivate a good relationship with my children. They're all so unique. They're all so hard to figure out. You think you got it figured out, and then you don't. And so the guardian angel knows all the secrets and really helps you to understand and helps to guide you to say the right things. The word angel means messenger. They're all about communications. They're all about the message. So they should be there as silent partners in our conversations. And they'll light and guard, rule and guide, and we'll pick up on it. We'll experience it over time.
I love that. The guardian angel knows all the secrets. I
Yeah.
found it helps me. So my kids will read at mass or they'll be anxious about something. And then it sometimes seeing them anxious can make me feel a little anxious. And I'll find myself just asking their guardian angel to be with them. And my anxiety goes away, just kind of entrusting that
Yeah.
and seeing how that plays out. But I love that you said that the angel knows all the secrets and can guide us.
And when you're in a conversation where you can feel that the temperature is rising, the tempers are rising, you can call silently in your heart, call upon the guardian angel to help you diffuse the situation. Help me to find a way to lead this down a better path. And there are lots of reasons why this works, right? Even on the natural level, even on the natural level, it's you hitting the pause button, right? And just seeing this child as a child of God, as an immortal soul that's been entrusted to you. All of these things that you do implicitly when you acknowledge their guardian angel. And it helps you to know that there's someone else in the room. Okay, there are lots
Mm.
of things that we'll say in in front of our kids, unfortunately, that we would never say in front of the neighbors, right? And this helps us to know that the neighbors are always in the room. Our guardian angels are always with us there, and we know this. We believe it, but this reinforces it. It's an act of faith in that reality.
That's wonderful. You talked about differences in our kids, and obviously, we're all different, we're all unique. And we can see this translate also in our parishes. The differences just based on the culture and the traditions of the areas that we're in. We see this throughout the world as Christianity and Catholicism, if you travel, might show up different in different places, but the roots are the same. And you say at the end of your book, the most important lesson we can take from all of history then is to treasure our own traditions, but to be flexible about them.
Yeah. Because God is always working it. God is always bringing us to greater understanding. He's bringing us to greater beauty, really, by exposing us to different cultures and different developments. I love the ancient church, right? But I can't look back to it as a golden age. I love the churches that have survived from then, but I love the medieval churches too. I love a lot of modern churches. A lot of things that come to fruition, come through development, are just wonderful. The different kinds of music that we have, and we can trust the process, that it'll work out over time, that you can go through a bad period in aesthetics or other kinds of development, but generally the church gets through it. God gets us through it,
Mm.
and we can just approach it in a hopeful way rather than in an entirely contentious way.
Yeah, I have a very close family member who is not Catholic. And after my mom passed away, I remember her telling me, I always asked your mom, why are you still Catholic? She'd always have these questions. And my mom had responded to her, if it hasn't crumbled in thousands of years, that tells me there's a truth there. And
Yeah,
that was
right.
why she had stayed. And I thought that was really beautiful. But it has changed and it has evolved.
Yeah.
And how can we better embrace other traditions that are different than our own? If you have any advice on this, because change can be really hard for people. And we see this even in those who attend maybe the Latin rite of the Mass versus the Novus Ordo. And people have very strong opinions or can have very strong opinions. And I think they can both be so beautiful. But do you have any advice just for opening our hearts to embrace something that is true and that is validated by the church when it's different?
Well, when we were here, like all of us, all the kids, and all the kids are grown and gone now, but my rule was that I will not forbid what the bishop permits,
Mm,
and I will not permit what the bishop forbids. And so it does keep our focus on who's the real authority in the church. The real authority in the church is the bishop, right, who answers to the pope. But for me, he is the near authority. It's the bishop. He has real authority in the church where I live. And so if the bishop is giving the kind of freedom so that you can go to the mass using the missal of 1962, or you can go to the mass of the missal of Paul VI, that's a great freedom. The bishop has given it to us. And either way we choose to go is good. We have that freedom and we can exercise it in whatever way we want. I don't need to exercise it the way you do. And I don't think you need to exercise it the way I do. But I'll exercise it as I can. And this applies in 1,000 different ways in terms of liturgical discipline, for example, when we do have options, when our bishops give us options, I think that it's a good measure just to allow ourselves the freedom to choose from the options they give us and not think that we have to adjudicate everything ourselves.
absolutely. Before I get to my final question, do you have any last takeaways, something that you hope that people can take from the ideas of this book that you wrote? And again, the title of it is Rabbles, Riots, and Ruins 12 Ancient Cities and How They Were Evangelized.
I think if there is one thing I want them to take away, it is hope that no culture, no society is beyond the reach of Jesus Christ. Okay? That grace can reach these people, grace can change these people, grace can convert these people, put an end to centuries of persecution. and that God is working this out in his time. But so many people look to the ancient church and they think that it was a golden age. But think about how those people were living. The church was illegal for 250, 270 years through most of the world. And to practice Christianity was a capital crime. If you were caught, you could be executed the next day. That's a big pressure for all those years. One generation after another prayed for an end to the persecution, and their prayers seemed not to be answered, right? Until they were. Now we look at that time as, oh, wow, it was a time of heroes and this and that, but it was a time of trial, right? So
Mm.
we have to look at our own times as the time of our testing, of our trial. And our trial might not be a persecution of blood. It might be something else. It might be fidelity to the church in spite of whatever controversy happens to be rocking it today. And we need to be true to it. We need to be the saints that God is calling to respond to the particular challenges of our time. It's always going to be different. And I hope that's what people see when they look at the 12 cities that I examined in this book.
Yeah. And I think going back to this idea of there are different ways to evangelize, as we're recording, we are awaiting the start of the conclave, which will begin on May 7th, but we will have a new pope by the time that this airs. And so I think just remembering whoever it is, there are different ways to evangelize. And whoever the pope is, the Holy Spirit has anointed, and trusting that is the person for now. Just because I've seen a lot of different things already coming out, and one of them was a reflection from a priest on these are different cardinals, and this is kind of what their emphasis is in the area that they are in. And it just so much reminds me of these different cities and the way that these cardinals are evangelizing and bringing the word of God in their area, which can look very different from what is in the US.
Sure, sure. We don't know what's coming, but God does. And God is making the choice for us of who will hold that authority. We have to trust him. We have to trust him and not think that we know better.
Amen. Okay, I always end every episode with my guest leaving us with either a favorite prayer tip or a scripture verse. So I'll give you a second to reflect on that.
I'm going to
You
go
have
back to
anything?
the one I said before, and I'm
Okay.
going to say, greet the guardian angel of your children silently in your heart. The moment you see them, first thing that
Mm,
day, and every time you talk. And you know what? Use that with everyone. Use it with your spouse. Use it with your neighbors. Use it with the people at church. Use it with everyone you meet. Okay, just silently in your heart when you meet them, when you greet them, greet their guardian angel, because it keeps you mindful of the fact that there is a supernatural dimension to this encounter. It's something real. This is something big. Even if you're finding it annoying at the moment, you recognize then that that's on you, right?
yeah, I'm just thinking you just saying that just reminded me of how important it is to greet the guardian angels in the good moments. I'm pretty good about noticing when someone's at mass and their kid starts crying. I'm like, "Oh," asking their guardian angel to help the mom to just
Mhm. Yeah.
like, "Hey, it's okay," and help the child to just calm themselves or whatever they need to do.
Mhm.
But just hearing you say that again, it's the reminder of we can greet the guardian angels in the good too. We don't have to wait for the moment that feels chaotic.
Always. We can greet them always.
Yes. What a beautiful reminder.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. This has been wonderful. I very much appreciate you and encourage everyone to go out and check out this book. But you have a lot of other books out there as well and podcasts. If you have any favorites you want to recommend, feel free.
They're all my favorites.
They're all your
You, you,
favorites.
you can see them at fathersofthechurch.com. You'll find the best prices at catholicbooksdirect.com. catholicbooksdirect.com.
Okay. I will link that in the show notes so everyone can find it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again for having me on. It's been an honor.
Beautiful souls, thank you again for journeying with me. If you have been blessed by this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a review. Be sure to screenshot it, share it on your social media stories, and don't forget to tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Kylie M. Hine. Stay persistent in prayer, protect your peace, and as always, share the light of Christ with everyone around you.